Have you ever noticed the colorful stripes painted on train cars? Turns out, railway companies don't waste paint just for aesthetic reasons. Every stripe design, or livery, the proper term for it, has a special meaning and serves a very important purpose. Stripes can indicate the speed of the train, the destination, and the type of carriage or service, but they're also part of the variety of symbols that help passengers understand train-related information and navigate through the station and the train. Sometimes you can find special stripes painted in different colors above the last window of some coaches. They warn passengers that this particular coach is somehow different from the others. Of course, these symbols will vary depending on the country. For example, Indian railway operators apply white stripes on blue railway coaches to indicate the unreserved second-class cars of a particular train. These stripes help passengers easily identify the available general coach when the train arrives on the platform. Meanwhile, red stripes on gray coaches indicate the first-class compartments. And these broad yellow stripes, painted on a blue or red background, indicate that the cars are reserved for sick or physically disabled passengers. And if you ever see gray coaches with green stripes on Indian trains, it means that only women are allowed to use them. Also, in 2019, the North Frontier Railway Zone of the Indian Railways introduced these pink female sleeper coaches. They were trying to encourage women to make long-distance journeys. During these trips, train workers make sure that outsiders don't have access to this car to provide better security to the female passengers that travel alone or with minor children. And the bright color helps identify female cars even during rush hours. In Japan, they also use the pink color to put special stripes on metro and suburban train lines to identify women-only cars. Male passengers are not allowed to board these cars during rush hours for security reasons. The same women-only carriages have been created in the subways of Brazil, Dubai, Indonesia, Iran, and Egypt. But let's go back to the railroad. Turns out there's a better way to get rid of annoying fellow travelers. You can buy a private railway carriage, reconstruct its interior, and make your own cozy apartment on wheels. If you're wealthy enough, of course. The National Railroad Passenger Corporation, also known as Amtrak, has provided passenger railroad services in the U.S. and Canada since the 1970s. The company has introduced a special offer. If you have a private carriage, well, Amtrak is eager to hitch it onto the scheduled train services between specified locations. This way, you can adjust your own route and travel all over the United States like a boss. Although you won't have to buy a train ticket, you'll still get a bunch of other fees, including a yearly safety inspection, annual registration fees for your private carriage, a mileage rate based on where and when you're traveling, and any other charges for any extra services. Storage cost in Amtrak's yard, for example, comes in at around $2,000 per month. And you'll have to buy a carriage in the first place. If you're just a beginner in this business without a tight budget, hey, don't worry, they'll train you. Ha, that's a joke. Actually, you can start with an unrestored beater car without electric power. Its price will start at about $25,000. Meanwhile, a fully restored carriage can cost up to $500,000, and up to infinity if you decide to push the interior to the highest level. Why not? And what if you don't want to spend very much money, but would still like to experience a rail trip in your own car? Some private collectors rent out their railway carriages to other people for short-term trips, parties, or historical tours. So, if you want to experience this adventure, just do the research in your area. Some of these tours will allow you to visit masterpiece carriages with truly sophisticated restored interiors. Now, although owning a private carriage is a very expensive hobby, at least you can paint and decorate it however you like. Meanwhile, ordinary commercial rail cars have strict corporate color schemes and cannot afford to be authentic. Sometimes we see very similar trains owned by the same company, but the stripes that decorate the cars on the outside are still slightly different. Have you ever wondered why? Who decides that, and what does it mean? Well, it usually means that the trains have been painted at different times and in different places, following the evolution of the corporate brand book and the arrival of new models of locomotives and cars. For example, Amtrak, as I mentioned earlier, remember, has developed a variety of paint schemes on its rolling stock since the beginning of intercity passenger rail services. There are 7 basic schemes or phases in use. These phases use geometric arrangements of red, white, and blue, representing the colors of the U.S. flag. The themes look alike, but the most attentive passengers will definitely not have a hard time spotting those little variations. Here's the so-called Phase 1, first introduced in 1972. Amtrak painted its locomotives using the elegant platinum mist color, or in more simple terms, light gray. They put the iconic Arrow logo on the side and painted the roofs black. The nose is painted red on purpose. It makes the locomotive more visible to pedestrians and drivers. The company covered its passenger cars with silver paint and then red and blue stripes bracketed by thin white stripes at window level. The chevron logo was then put at one or both ends. 2 years later, the company began to operate the new GE E60 locomotives, and it launched the Phase 2 paint scheme. They replaced the famous red nose and chevron logo on the locomotives and painted stripes similar to those on the passenger cars. Most passenger cars were essentially unchanged from Phase 1 except for the removal of the chevron logo. After 2 years, Amtrak introduced Phase 3 and still uses it on some equipment. It removed the outer white pinstripes on both passenger cars and locomotives. The inner stripe was widened and the red, white, and blue stripes became equally wide. The company also painted turboliners and the LRC test train white and applied stripes at the bottom of the train. The white band was rather reflective and allowed a place for the car information. Continuing our train fashion show, next, in 1993, the company introduced Phase 4. It was a striking change after the previous era of the traditional red, white, and blue style. Phase 4 has 2 thin red stripes and a thick dark blue stripe. In this period, Amtrak brought the new Superliner 2 cars into service. In 1997, Amtrak distributed this scheme among some locomotives on the Northeast Corridor services. That's a lot of adjustment so far. But let's move on to the next phase. When Amtrak began to operate Acela Express high-speed train sets in 2000, it launched Phase 5, and it's still widely used today. They painted locomotives light gray. At the top, they applied a blue stripe, which was darker than Phases 1 through 3, but lighter than Phase 4. And the bottom was decorated with a thin red reflective sill stripe. The company put its logo near the front or rear of the unit. Meanwhile, express boxcars received blue stripes on both top and bottom. And all non-passenger cars, like Autotrain Autoracks, received an all-gray finish with one red stripe and logo. And now we're heading into Phase 6, also known as Phase 4B. Why? Don't ask. Amtrak introduced it in 2002, and it's currently in use on most passenger cars. They kept the same stripe style as Phase 4, including wide window stripes on single-level cars and narrow stripes on superliners. The red reflective sill stripe and mid-tone blue on Phase 5 are still in use. Single-level cars got white logos within a blue stripe, while superliners got blue logos below the stripes. 5 of the first 6 Siemens Charger ALC 42 logos retain this beautiful Phase 6 scheme, mostly blue body with red and black around the windshield and red and silver chevrons at the rear. In July 2021, Amtrak celebrated its 50th anniversary and introduced some new designs to mark this milestone. 6 new specially made anniversary locomotives include this unique midnight blue livery that celebrates the company's employees who keep passengers moving across the nation throughout the night. Amtrak also presented a sneak peek of what Phase 7 will look like and promised to bring a greater sense of modernity and cohesion throughout their train designs. Okay, but what about this fashionable train creature? You've probably recognized this color scheme. Railway companies call it tiger stripes because it reminds them of the stripes of a tiger. Okay, I get it. They use this paint pattern to improve the visibility of their locomotives. First of all, the entire locomotive gets painted bright yellow, and then they add diagonal black stripes to the front and back. This way, you can see this tiger moving from a very far distance. And, like, keep off the tracks.
Hello, Brightsiders! Do you want to ride the world's fastest train ever? So you're at the station waiting for the train, and suddenly a strong gust of wind blows up and people's hats fly up in the air. This gust was caused by the fastest train in the world, which just passed your station at 375 miles per hour without making a sound. What is this miracle? It is the SC maglev train developed by Japan Railways Company, and it has set a new world record for speed and will connect Japan's largest cities, Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka. The entire route will take 67 minutes. So this train could make the trip from New York to Washington, D.C. in just 1 hour. That's faster than getting there by a plane. And at the same time, the train wouldn't create noise or pollute the atmosphere. After all, it doesn't even have an engine. And it doesn't make the wheels clatter against the rails because the train levitates in the air and doesn't touch the ground. And there aren't even any rails. Do you want to know how it works? Let me tell you. Let's take a look under the skin of the train. All the train uses to move is magnets, or rather, superconducting magnets. These ovals are our supermagnets. So what's so special about them? If you run an electric current through them, they create a strong magnetic field around themselves. You can see it on these lines. And the more robust the current, the bigger and more powerful the magnetic field is. But the electric current gradually heats the magnet and its efficiency goes down. The magnetic field gets weaker too. Because of the high temperature, the magnet creates more resistance to the current. A regular phone charger works pretty much the same way. The wire can get hot when you charge your phone because it creates a slight resistance to the electric current, like in our electromagnets on the train. The obvious solution is to cool the magnet down to turn it into a superconductor. We can do this if we reach a temperature of minus 440 degrees Fahrenheit. It's almost like the temperature of outer space. At that temperature, the magnet material stops resisting electric current altogether. That's why it's called a superconductor. The main advantage of this is that we don't need to supply electric current to the magnet all the time. We only need to charge the magnet once. Then the current will circle inside it indefinitely and the magnetic field will be solid. So how do we reach this super low temperature? To cool the electromagnet, we need a liquid helium tank. This frigid substance circulates in the case around the magnet and cools it. As it does, the helium evaporates and goes to a kind of a refrigerator. There, it's cooled again and compressed to its original state. And the liquid helium is sent back into the tank at the end of the cycle. But even that's not enough to keep the magnet in a superconductor state. So the engineers added another heat shield. It's a kind of a box with liquid nitrogen circulating in it. It goes through the same cycle as the liquid helium. Such blocks of 4 superconducting magnets and cooling units are installed along the entire length of the train on either side. And these magnets are only half of the force that makes the train move. The other half is hidden in the guideways. So what's inside there? Similar O-shaped electromagnets are mounted on the sides of the guideway. The polarity alternates between north-south and north-south, north-south, and it just keeps going like that. Just like the polarity of the magnets inside the train. Now, let's put our trains on a guideway. You can see that the magnets inside the train and the guideway are on the same level. So, how do we make a train move without it having an engine? We know that the opposite poles of magnets, north and south, will attract, and the matching charges will push back like north and north. These arrows show the forces of attraction and repulsion of the magnets, and all the forces here are directed diagonally. The resulting force here is directed forward, and the train is starting to move forward a little bit. Now, the train has to reverse the polarity of its magnets. This is done by changing the direction of the electric current inside the magnets. Again, there are those forces of attraction and repulsion between the train and the guideway, and the train keeps going. The driver can adjust the train's speed by changing the polarity of the magnets. The more often north changes to south, the faster the train will go. But why doesn't the train fall off to the ground? It is the most exciting thing about the train: levitation. Many people think that the train doesn't touch the ground because the bottom of the train is a giant magnet. At the same time, the guideway is a huge magnet of the same polarity. The magnets repel and the train levitates. That's not true. The magnets on the sides of the guideway do all the work. They're the same O-shaped magnets, only twisted so that they look like a number 8. Imagine a pair of magnets within either side of the train is one giant magnet. The north is on the left and the south is on the right. It hangs precisely in the middle of the 8-shaped magnet when the train rides. But gravity forces the train down. Then the train's magnetic field charges this 8-shaped coil. Now an electric current is moving in it too. As a result, the top loop of the magnet is charged south and the bottom loop north. The magnets interact and the resulting force is directed upward and the train rises. The same thing happens when the train goes down. The 8-shaped magnets are charged so that the top loop is north and the bottom south. The resulting force is downward and the train goes down. It happens on its own thanks to the laws of physics, without the driver even needing to do anything. And the train keeps going, floating above the guideway at the height of about 4 inches. That's like the height of a toothpaste tube. So the train can only levitate when it moves? Exactly. That doesn't mean that it just falls to the ground when it arrives at the station. Maglev has regular wheels for this as well. The train stands on the wheels at the station and then picks up the speed on them. The wheels retract like airplane landing gear when it reaches about 95 miles per hour. And the driver only lowers them when they need to stop at the station again. But if it doesn't have wheels, it can't turn, right? Well, yes, but it turns and maneuvers using the guideway. It is done by these identical 8-shaped coils we've seen before. They're connected to each other under the guideway's surface. When the train shifts to the right, its magnets charge the coils. But because the train's magnets are more toward the right coil, it's charged more. And the magnetic field is much stronger there. It creates a force that pushes the train back to the center of the guideway. The same thing happens if the train moves to the left. The coil charges and the magnetic field pushes the train to the center. Ding ding! The bell sounds and the maglev departs from the station in Tokyo. It accelerates to the speed where the magnetic field will allow it to levitate, and the driver removes the wheels and increases the speed. The train reverses the polarity of the magnets in a fraction of a second and the train accelerates. In an hour, the train arrives at its destination. The driver slows the machine down and the magnetic field becomes weaker. It's time to let the wheels out. The train lands and begins to slow down. Such an advanced technology must have a lot of problems, right? Well, yes. The first is size. The maglev is much smaller and can carry fewer passengers. Also, the rails can change direction for a train in a couple of seconds, but to change a guideway direction for a maglev would require more expensive and much slower technology. So, on the same stretch of guideway, high-speed trains on rails can run every 3 minutes compared to 10 for a maglev train. Another problem is aerodynamics. The faster the train goes, the harder it is for it to get through the air. At 190 miles per hour, the maglev and the other superfast trains use about the same amount of energy. But at the speeds above 310 miles per hour, the maglev will consume 4 times as much electricity. And given the small number of passengers on the train, tickets to it will be so much more expensive than conventional trains. In addition, the maglev can't run on traditional rails, and the engineers will need to build an utterly new guideway route. And they'll need to drill a lot of tunnels, which will make the project even more expensive. So why would Japan need such an expensive and impractical solution? For several reasons. The first is seismic activity. Japan is the site of many earthquakes, and traditional rails often get damaged. An earthquake can destroy the entire infrastructure in just a couple of minutes. Maglev's guideways will be laid further off the coast in the so-called green zone, where earthquakes won't threaten the train or the guideways. And the main reason, this high-speed train will connect 3 heavily populated cities. The route from one to another will take 1 hour at most. It will give a massive chance for overall economic growth and could bring in a lot of money in the future. Also, Japan is considering selling this train to other countries. So, would you want this train in your state? And if so, where would your first trip be to? Leave the answers in the comments.